Hello, everybody. Welcome into To The Point. We're all doing well on this Thursday. The Vegas Golden Knights are Stanley Cup champions. The long 6-year wait, the fans there had to battle through some tough times, 1 year of not making the playoffs, and now they are officially Stanley Cup champions. Congratulations to Vegas. Congratulations to Bill Foley and the National Hockey League because the expansion draft worked. It's been a success, and Vegas is now one of the biggest markets in the NHL. So we have to give credit to Gary Bettman there. Full reaction to the game and just kind of the aftermath of it all today. Going to react to the Senators' new owner, Michael Andauer, Peter Laviolette, the new head coach of New York, Sheldon Keefe going to coach the Leafs, not hearing anything. The last kind of domino to fall, or not a domino if you keep the coach, but they don't say anything, so what does that mean? U.S. Open has teed off in LA, the LA Country Club. We'll talk about that today. Go through the FanDuel best bets, odds for different players to win, and there's also some NBA rumors going on as well. But I'll be the first to admit I had Winnipeg beating Vegas in the first round. I couldn't have been more wrong. I looked at this team and I didn't trust their goaltending. That was the basic thing. You look at the team and you like the outlook of it. Jonathan Marchessault, really good player. Riley Smith, good player. Bill Karlsson, consistently a good player. Chandler Stevenson, love him. Trade for Ivan Barbashev. That was the guy I wanted every team in the NHL to go get. They did it. Go figure, they win. They had a great nucleus. But I looked at their goaltending, and I didn't trust Aiden Hill. I didn't trust Robert Brossoit. If it came to it, I didn't trust Jonathan Quick. But what I think we learned here in the 3-month grind to finding a champion is teams ultimately win, not players. I think that's been the case for a long time, but it's even more illuminating now. Matthew Tkachuk is better than any player in the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas won. Vegas played the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton has 2 or 3 players better than any player in the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas won. Jason Robertson, Miro Heiskanen, Jake Ottinger. You go through it. Dallas had better players than Vegas as well, and yet they win that series. It was a team effort from the jump, and what I find funny is a lot of the discussion was, the expansion draft won them this, and it wasn't. They benefited from this, and they plunged to go get players, and that was the reason they won. I really don't see it that way. The Vegas Golden Knights won this year, not because they made huge trades. Eichel was acquired years ago. Mark Stone was acquired in free agency years ago. They won this year because they played as a team, because they gelled, and because they had the best defense score in the National Hockey League. Pietrangelo wasn't acquired this year. Shea Theodore wasn't acquired this year. So that narrative is incorrect. That narrative is lazy. It's a piece that you write and you put out there, but it's not the correct piece that you should write. The pieces, we have Alex Pietrangelo, we have Shea Theodore, we have Nick Hague, we have Alec Martinez, we have all these great defensemen. We have a really good team that we've built over years. How about we just go play? How about we gel? How about we get a great coach in Bruce Cassidy, who, at his core, the best things he did in Boston was implement defensive structures that have helped that team for years, including this one when they're the best team in the regular season in the history of the league. There's just principles that he brought in that guys like Peter DeBoer and Gerard Gallant, who Gerard Gallant was a good first-year head coach. I've talked about how I don't think he's a good X's and O's head coach, how I don't think structurally he knows what he's doing all that well, that Bruce Cassidy was just flat out better at. And it worked out for Vegas. Vegas was the better team. They were the healthier team. And ultimately, they win because of that. Jonathan Marchessault used to be a Florida Panther. He wins the Conn Smythe Trophy. He was amazing in the playoffs, and he was their best player. What I'm curious to see is how GMs look at this Vegas team. If you have one of the top 10 players in the league, you're not going to trade a top 10 player away to get a team more built like Vegas, because that's stupid. It just is. It's not the way to approach moving on. You need to have nuance. You need to have an understanding of who you are and what you want to be. But at the same time, I think teams should look at the fundamental principle of winning. To me, this is the most simple thing. It helps when you have an elite goaltender, certainly. Nobody will say Andre Vasilevsky's not a great goaltender. I think he's a top 5 player in the world, personally. Still, okay, he didn't have a great playoff. He made it to 3 straight Cup finals. I'm giving him a break over 1 year. I think he's a top 5 player in the league, and I'll rank him above a bunch of guys that you probably have higher. Don't care. But what did Vasilevsky have in front of him? He had a big defense. And this is the thing that is, to me, it's fundamental. It's never going to change. It has to happen. You have a big defense scorer that can defend, you have a chance to win. Pietrangelo and Shea Theodore are both number 1 defensemen on the same team. That helps. But Nick Hague is a monster that will not be slowed down. That guy is so big. He's so mean. He'll block every shot. He's awesome, Nick Hague. Martinez is small compared to the rest, but he knows what he's doing. He's been on winning teams. Vegas didn't have a small defenseman. Whitecloud, 6'2". You go through the team, they're big men. And it can't be 5'8" defensemen. It can't be 5'10" defensemen that weigh 170 pounds. You're not going to win. The biggest reason the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup, and this might sound harsh, but the biggest reason they won was because Sammy Girard broke his sternum. That sounds harsh, but it's just a fact. He got hurt in the series against St. Louis. Ivan Barbashev, go figure, hit him hard, because that's what he does. Broke his sternum, he's out for the playoffs. Well, what happens? Eric Johnson, Jack Johnson, bigger guys come into the lineup. You have Josh Manson, who they had at the trade deadline, and they have nobody under 6'1" playing defense. And you know what happened? They won. And they were great defensively, and it didn't matter. They churned it out. It sounds tough, but to me, if you're going to have a team with small defensemen that are quote-unquote puck movers, you're going to need a lot of insulation, and you're going to need a lot of forwards that are willing to back check, that are willing to play harder in their own zone and commit more defensively. Because otherwise, that's a liability. You're not physical enough to hold up. You turn the puck over. You don't want to take as many hits because you don't have as much insulation as the others. And before you know it, you're fucked. That's the crux of what's happening here. You still need a huge defense. You still need big people to win. You can have all the great players up front. But why doesn't Edmonton win? Why doesn't Toronto win, who are the favorites to win the Stanley Cup next year? They don't got a big defense. They got weaknesses all over their team. They play bad fundamentally. They got slow defensemen. They got old defensemen. All I hear, it's a new wave where you need speed and skill. Okay, speed and skill, yes. But you can get speed and skilled players that are big men. Keegan Colasar, fourth liner for the Vegas Golden Knights. He will likely never be more than a fourth liner. But he's fast, and he's big, and he hits, and he's mean, and he's perfect for that. Carrier, same thing. Why did Florida win some of those series? It wasn't just Bobrovsky. You get under people's skin, you hit people, and they had a big defense too. But they weren't as good as Vegas. But to me, that is the biggest reason for success, is having that defense. Because then you don't need to pay a goaltender $10.5 million. Or you don't need to pay a goalie $9 million, or you don't need to go trade for Connor Hellebuck. But if your defense is adequate, you're not going to win. Unless Carey Price plays out of his mind, and Montreal still didn't win, but they had a big defense. Do you remember that? Shea Weber, Petrie, Sherratt. They played like 4 guys, but they played 4 huge defensemen. They ate up minutes, and Carey Price made saves. That's why they were even in that fucking series. That's why they won so many of that's why they got to the Cup final. I think this is a good Stanley Cup winner for the Vegas Golden Knights. I do. If the thought is for, I meant the NHL, pardon me. I think this is a good Stanley Cup winner for the NHL. If the thought is, well, ratings were down, people didn't care about the final, that's more on, I've talked about this, that's more on the league than it is on the teams. The team's trying to win. They don't give a shit. People aren't watching. Like Alan Walsh talked about the ratings after I saw him on Twitter, probably bitching that Marc-Andre Fleury wasn't still on Vegas because I think he still has a rod up his ass about that, where should just try to get Marc-Andre. He should be lucky Marc-Andre Fleury's still getting as many starts as he gets, but that's another story for another day. But this is an expansion franchise. The owner said we're going to win a cup within 6 years. It's year 6. And nobody can tell me that the people in Vegas didn't care, that they didn't love this run. They didn't support the team. They didn't sell out the rink. They didn't get celebrities. They did. I said this before. If the NHL wanted to change it, they went to the NFL model, where you don't go to home and away teams, Vegas would host it every year. 2 reasons. Fun, because people are going to go, and weather. That's what they want. They don't care about the other crap. That's what matters to these people. And Vegas had great crowds. They had energy. They had a great team that were fun to watch. Okay, ratings are down. Gary Bettman, PR, that's on you. That's on the media, as I talked about, for not covering it, for not caring. But to see this team win is a good story. It is a good result for the league. Gives hope to Seattle. Gives hope to more teams if you want to expand further. And ultimately, it puts pressure on these teams that have been around forever, you know who I'm talking about, to finally fucking win something. The argument is, it hurts our original 6 teams. The Rangers haven't won since 94. The Leafs haven't won since 67. The Oilers haven't won since 91, was it? Something like that. Okay. Well, that's not Vegas's fault. That's not Vegas's fault who are an expansion team. Maybe look at the way they do business. Maybe be more cutthroat. Don't have such a tribalistic point of view. And to me, it's just Canadian teams not winning 30 years. Again, It's not on the league to make sure a Canadian team wins. Oh, it's a Vegas Florida final. Nobody cares. I watched it. Was it a great series? No. Because Vegas was head and shoulders better. Florida was injured, and it made it tough. Particular games 4 and 5. But is this winner bad because it's not a Canadian team? Or, the droughts aren't over? Or Toronto should have won? Or Edmonton should have won? No, who cares? That's a moot point. It doesn't change the perspective of the winner, of how the league looks at it. Original 6 teams have just as good a chance to win every year. Quite frankly, they should have a better chance to win because guess what? They've been around longer. You think they know the business a little better. Bill Foley and the Vegas Golden Knights, they've been around 6 fucking years. They won a Stanley Cup. They've been to 2 Stanley Cup finals. It's funny. It is. Canadian NHL teams have been to 2 Stanley Cup finals in the last 15 years. Vancouver in 2011 and Montreal. That's it. That's it. So, to me, it's the best team wins. The best team won. I don't buy into these narratives about ending droughts. I don't care. I look at the teams. I see who thinks the best, and I do it. Now we go into the offseason. We can talk about all the teams that lost. Talk about free agency. Talk about trading people. That's fun. I like that. But do I feel any sympathy for any team? Fuck no. Why should I? I'm not a fan of any of them. And believe me, if you want me to have sympathy for teams like the Edmonton Oilers, Toronto Maple Leafs, New York Rangers, cry me a fucking river. I don't work for TSN or Sportsnet, so I don't get paid to do it. So I don't get paid to feel bad, to make people think that I really care. I don't care. Who wins? Oh, there's a winner, there's a loser. Boston had the greatest regular season in history. They lost in the first round. Who cares? You move on. Fans of the Boston Bruins are sad. People that hate the Boston Bruins are happy. Good. That's life. My life, I don't care who wins. Denver Nuggets win the NBA championship. Good for them. Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup. Good for them. But the fact, Vegas wins, we're not supposed to like this? Okay. People will write that. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, journalism is dead, but I mean, you have this, your job is to cover the sport, and your article is the Vegas Golden Knights win, but how good is this for the league? What kind of fucking article, what kind of job is that? That's called doing your job incorrectly and doing it poorly. Because you're covering the league. If not, get a job with a team. Call up some people. I'm sure you can get a job with a team. Because clearly you got a bias somewhere. I think I know where it's going in that particular article. But anyway, it's just stupid laziness. To me, I like to point out when I see people doing a poor job of doing something. Darren Millard, who I like a lot, works for the Vegas Golden Knights. Is he a homer? Yes, but he works for the team. Do I think he should be a homer? No, that's not the way I'd approach the job, but I'd probably be fired from that job, so kudos to him. He's got a good podcast. He used to work for Sportsnet. I think he's really good at what he does. Gary Lawless works for the Vegas Golden Knights. Good for him. But he literally works for the team. Joe Bowen, okay, he works for the Maple Leafs. He's a homer. He does Leafs broadcasts. I'd be more professional and I'd do it a different way, but guess what? He's been doing it for 40 years. Kudos to him. So that is but if you're writing for, I don't know, The Athletic or TSN or a bunch of these other, ESPN, your job is to cover the sport, not to kiss the ass and say, this wasn't a good final, or this wasn't a good result because of this. What kind of story is that? That's bullshit, is what it is. Anyway, I'll get off this topic, but it bothers me because I just see it everywhere, and it's like, God, could you just do your job correctly for fucking once? Mark Stone, Game 5 closeout, hat trick. First hat trick and a closeout game of a Stanley Cup final since 1922. Did not have that on the Mingo chart. Had 9 points in the Stanley Cup final. Was absolutely fantastic. Marchessault scored in the first 3 games. He wins the Conn Smythe. Adin Hill made some huge saves in this series. He's a free agent, so I'm sure he'll make some money in the open market. More than he's worth, quite frankly. But good for him. He won the cup. He earned to get a pay raise. Florida, 8 seed to the Stanley Cup final, they lose. That's the story. You go on the run, and ultimately it's not enough. But I have to give kudos to the Florida Panthers. They shouldn't have been this far. The Florida Panthers shouldn't have got this far. But yet, here they are. They didn't have as much talent as other teams. They don't have, their defense core doesn't look as formidable. But they battled their way here. Matthew Tkachuk couldn't have been better. Brandon Montour couldn't have been better. And they did all of it through multiple injuries that we learned on Tuesday night. Matthew Tkachuk has a broken sternum. He played Game 4 with a broken sternum. Brady had to help him out of bed for Game 4. Crazy stuff. He needs surgery. Brandon Montour has a torn labrum. Requires surgery. He'll be out 3 months. Meaning, depending on when he wants to get the surgery, which a lot of time athletes don't like to get the surgery right after the season, because then you miss a lot of your summer, and you kind of want to enjoy that after a long year. Meaning if it's a 3-month recovery from now, he might be ready for training camp, might not be. So that's a decision. Aaron Ekblad, broken foot, separated shoulder, another problem in his shoulder, UC joint. He's broken all to hell. He doesn't miss a game. The NHL playoffs are different. They just are when it comes to injuries and battling your way through. Imagine if Brandon Montour had 2 good labrums. He was unbelievable in the playoffs. He couldn't have played better. Couldn't have played better, and if he had another labrum, maybe he'd be even better. After I said he couldn't have played better. So I don't know. Could he have? Maybe. If he had another arm. It's crazy what the Florida Panthers went through. And they battled and they got to this point. I think Tkachuk had a concussion as well. Of course, I'm not going to talk about that. I think he was concussed. I think it was clear. He came back into the game. He might have cleared concussion protocol. But to me, he had a concussion. So he had multiple injuries. Radko Gudas, didn't talk about him. He's got to be banged up because he was going through a lot of stuff in the postseason. But you don't win, but you get this far. Nobody will remember who got to the Stanley Cup final in 6 months. It's just the truth. But right now, when it's top of mind, you have to give respect. You have to give applause to these players because they battled. They get to the Stanley Cup final, the second Stanley Cup final in team history for the Florida Panthers. And the best thing I can say about them, I talked about this yesterday with a few people. Can Florida, get back? Yes, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely. If I had to bet them making the playoffs or missing the playoffs, I would say miss the playoffs next year. Because they barely got in this year. And the East is tough, and every team thinks that. My dad grew up loving. Dan Marino got to a Super Bowl. Never got to another one. And he's one of the best players to ever play the game. but he only got to 1. You think you're going to get to a whole lot, but are you really? You have to get through 31 teams. You have to get through 3 series to get to the final. The Florida Panthers made the Stanley Cup final in 96. It's 2023. That's a long time. Best thing you can say about the Florida Panthers is that they are now a perennial playoff team. Made it in back-to-back years. Second round, then they go to a Stanley Cup final. You're seeing progression. Bill Zito traded for Matthew Tkachuk. It worked out. Montour was a good bet from getting him from Buffalo. Credit to him, the Stahl brothers, who I didn't think were going to be effective at all, held up. So he deserves some kudos for what he did in Florida. But it's so difficult to get back. The injuries, the feeling of defeat going into the next season, knowing you have to do so much to get back there. But if I had to bet today, the Florida Panthers make or miss the playoffs next year, I'm going to say miss the playoffs. Even though the Eastern Conference is weaker, teams are starting to fold. The Philadelphia Flyers are tanking. What the hell is Columbus doing? Pittsburgh is old as hell. Washington's an older team. It's still a really difficult. When's Tkachuk going to start next year? Well, when's Montour going to have the surgery? It all matters. Because if it's a 3-month recovery, like I just said, I don't think he's going to have the surgery next week. That's just a guess from yours truly, but I think he want to take some time off before he has to have surgery and then not have his arm for the next next month or so. So we'll see. But a fun ride by both teams. Florida beat the Bruins. They beat the Leafs. They swept the Hurricanes. Vegas got by Edmonton, the team I thought was going to win the Stanley Cup. They beat Winnipeg. And they get by Dallas. And ultimately they win. And now they'll have a party on the Strip Saturday night. A night parade, which is new, which I think is pretty cool. There's a parade today in Denver for the Nuggets. But I like the night parade on the Strip. I think that's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be fun. I'm happy for Mark Stone. I think a lot of him as a player. I think he's a stud. Ivan Barbashev gets his second Stanley Cup. Happy for him because I love him as a player, and I said he'd be the best trade deadline acquisition, and it turned out to be. Almost point per game in the postseason. He'll make some money this summer. Jack Eichel. First playoffs, first Stanley Cup. Batting 1,000. The trade paid off. He wanted to get the neck surgery that he looked into, know what the Buffalo Sabres wanted. Hey, turned out to be the right decision because clearly his surgery was successful. He played every game, battled through injuries, things of that nature, and played fantastic. So, and Phil Kessel, Black Ace gets his third Stanley Cup, and he throws shade at the Toronto media when he was interviewed, which is funny. 3 cups, Toronto still has none, he says. 3-time Stanley Cup champion, Phil Kessel. I got to imagine he retires, but who knows? It's Phil Kessel. I'd want to go out on top, but we'll see. The NHL buyout window opens tomorrow, so teams can start buying out players that they don't want. It'd be interesting to see Kyler Yamamoto as a candidate for Edmonton. Do the Maple Leafs look to buy out Matt Murray? There's a few other players that could be looked at for potential buyouts. So that will be interesting. That window opens tomorrow. It goes until June 30th, so you'll have 14 days to make decisions. And then free agency opens. So that's what's coming up for the National Hockey League. And there will also be, of course, trades and things that happen prior to the draft, which is a week from Wednesday. News yesterday, Jason Spezza is the new assistant general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Who could have seen this coming? Jason Spezza follows Kyle Dubas to Pittsburgh. He resigns the second after Dubas gets fired, and now he's in Pittsburgh. Kyle Dubas canned a bunch of people that were Ron Hextall's hires, and he's bringing in some of his own. No problem with that. Here's the thing, though. Jason Spezza gets hired as assistant general manager. Pittsburgh doesn't have a GM. Pittsburgh doesn't have a GM. They have a president, Kyle Dubas. Kyle Dubas said they're not hiring a GM until after the draft. So, what does that mean? Well, that means whoever the new GM is that gets brought on is going to not be able to pick his own AGM. It's going to be Jason Spezza, who he might not have any relationship with. Kyle Dubas hired Jason Spezza because he had a relationship with him. Brad Treliving, Dave Nonis worked with Brian Burke, had a relationship with him. It's like assistant coaches on your bench. A lot of the time, your AGM is somebody you've worked with before and you have a connection with. Steve Spott, Peter DeBoer, they go everywhere together. Whenever Peter DeBoer gets fired, Steve Spott follows him to his next head coaching job, and it just keeps going from there. Pittsburgh's an interesting operation. Kyle Dubas is running the ship. He's going to have full control. Good for him. He played his cards right. He's getting more money to work in Pittsburgh and not have as much scrutiny. But if it's just who is going to be the GM? Who's the stooge out there that's going to take that job knowing, and this isn't an opinion, this is a fact, knowing that you're going into the job and you're going to have to do what Kyle Dubas says? I think Kyle Dubas had a lot more leeway in Toronto with Brendan Shanahan. I think he got to do a lot of stuff that he didn't have to go through them all the time. He could make decisions. This GM hire to me is fascinating, and I think whoever it will be is going to be somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of pedigree and is going to come in and say yes. And just say, I want the job, or they've worked with Kyle and Sault Ste. Marie, or they have a connection. Because they don't have a general manager, but yet they have an AGM. So does that mean Kyle's going to be the GM and president, and you just have Spezza sitting there? I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work. But it's fascinating to me that you can hire somebody for an assistant to a job without having somebody in that position. We haven't hired a CEO of this Fortune 500 company yet, but you know what? We got a secretary. Okay. Are you trading in the New York Stock Exchange? Or are you going to do any? What kind of business? Oh, we'll figure that out. We don't got a CEO, but guess what? We got Dave in accounting. We got Mark in expenditures. We got everybody lined up, but the person running the company day to day. Because you can make the arguments, Kyle Dubas, but is it really? It's a president. It's a different job. President, you're marketing, you're talking to fans, you're getting sponsorship deals. That's more of the work. You're working with the alumni associations. And then when there's big trades, big moves, the president gets looped in, you talk to the GM, and more often than not, the GM says, I want to do this. And then the president, by proxy, goes to the owner. The owner says yes or no, and then you do it. The owner says, no, you're not trading for a player. Because guess what? The owner runs the company. But in this situation, the owner runs the business, but it's the hockey people that make hockey decisions. The general manager normally makes trades. He makes trade calls. He does the draft. He does everything. They announce the pick at the draft. Do you recall? Normally, it's a GM. Steve Yzerman, with no expression, says nothing and just says, yep, Detroit Red Wings would like to select player X. Is it going to be Jason Spezza? What really they should have did, Spezza should be the GM. He's underqualified. He doesn't have the credentials. But that doesn't mean somebody won't get the job. People that aren't underqualified get positions all the time. Look at the last couple of presidents of the United States, for example. He could have just been the general manager. Okay, we have our GM. I'm the president. He's going to listen to me anyway because we're best of buddies. He quit his job in Toronto to follow me here. I mean, God, I'm an angel to this person. He'll do whatever the hell I say. He's drinking the Kool-Aid. He believes in the Kyle Dubas way to be. He doesn't care. But I find it funny how they've done this. You hire an AGM without a GM in place. Jason Botterill is not going to Pittsburgh. He was a GM in Buffalo. I guarantee he's not taking that job. The person who takes this position will be a first-time GM. That is my prediction. Ken Hughes was a first-time GM in La Belle Province, Montreal. He was an agent, then became a GM, and he had the president, the figurehead of formerly the New York Rangers, above him. And to me, we all know who runs the business in Montreal, and it's not Ken Hughes, in my opinion. Whoever this new GM is, he might make a trade call, but it'll be because Kyle Dubas said, or this is what we want to do. Puppet with the strings. And this will be fun to watch. I have nothing against Kyle Dubas, but I can point out when I see things that are just clear as day. Your new GM might hate Jason Spezza, and you're still going to hire him. He could hate him. He might not know him. He doesn't have any relationship with him. Dave Nonis, Brian Burke, Brandon Pridham, Kyle Dubas. Kyle Dubas hired all his own people in Toronto. You remember that? All those nerds that were up with him, sitting there. The numbers people. We need 5'8" forwards. They all had a group together when Jason Spezza joined the cult. They joined the cult. Brad Treliving, like Craig Conroy. He hired him as an AGM because they had a relationship, because they knew each other really well, and that worked. I could go around the league. It happens all the time. Ron Francis, Jason Botterill worked in Carolina for a period of time, then got the Buffalo job. Guess who Ron Francis hired in Seattle? Jason Botterill. Because he had a relationship with him. Because he knows him. See where I'm going with this? Let's give you about 5 examples. It's funny. It's funny. But that's one situation in Pittsburgh. The Ottawa Senators have finally sold the team. Michael Landauer bought the club for $950 million. And he now owns that he needs approval from the board, but he will soon be the new owner of the Ottawa Senators. 2 things. I thought this had to be done before the NHL draft, which it will be. I predict he will announce their first selection as a new franchise, if you will, which we'll see if it happens. I think it will. This needed to be done. Took longer than I would have liked if I was the NHL. But nevertheless, you have a new owner in Ottawa. The Eugene Melnyk era is over. His daughters still own 10% of the team. But Michael Landauer is the principal owner. And he's the guy running the ship in Ottawa. So, what does this mean now? I think it's too late in the game to fire head coaches or fire a GM. The draft's in a week and a half because it's on a Wednesday, if you recall. Meaning you have very little time to hire somebody else. So I think Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith's jobs are safe until April of next year. We'll see if they make the playoffs. If they miss again, they will both be unemployed. Because normally, these owners like to hire their own people who they interview and develop a relationship with. It's a constant theme today. But I don't see any significant change happening overnight. But now Landauer's got he's got some work to do. He bought the team. He needs to get a new arena. He needs to get a land deal done and get the hell out of Canada, where they're playing now, which is one of the worst rink locations in the NHL. I would argue number one, even worse than Sunrise, Florida. It needs to be done, needs to happen. The Ottawa Senators can be a popular team, a team that gets good attendance, that gets good viewership. They aren't right now, in part because their location sucks and the team has not made the playoffs since 2018. 2017. Conference final. 2017. Pardon me. It's a long time. Any franchise, I don't care if you're in Canada, the US, if you're not making the playoffs for that length of time, people are going to check out. People are going to get frustrated. And Ottawa has gotten close. You hear about, okay, we're making strides. We're doing this, that, and the third. Well, how about make the playoffs? How about find some success? That is what people are clamoring for now. And that's what needs to happen, quite frankly, to turn this franchise around, to give them a boost, to give them a new look. They have Alex DeBrincat sitting there, who they will go to. They gave him a qualifying offer. I just don't see him fitting in Ottawa. I think he's going to want a long-term deal. He's a good player, not a great player. He's a small winger that can shoot the puck, yes. But I don't. They're going to go to arbitration with him. I don't see a huge. So this is how it works. They've probably been unwilling to sign a long-term deal with the club. Bruce Garriock notes that the Senators could receive up to a 15% discount on his $9 million qualifying offer if successful. To me, I'd trade him and see what you can get for him. He's an RFA. I think teams around the league would like Alex DeBrincat. You don't want to trade him because you just traded for him a year ago from the Chicago Blackhawks. But he doesn't want to stay, and clearly, that he is an RFA, so they own his rights. But get while the getting's good and see what you can get for him on the open market would be my approach. Because who knows? Who knows how this is going to go? But the Ottawa Senators get a new owner. That's good. They need a new ownership. They need a new rink. They need to make the playoffs. It's enough of, okay, we're building, we're doing this, that. No, win. Period. Tim Stützle is a star, blossoming superstar. The kid's a stud. Drake Batherson's a really good player. They haven't had a goalie in a very long time. Find one. Find one. I guess it's easier said than done. Samsonov, Aiden Hill, Hellebuck, if you want to be really big and make a trade for him, pay him some money. I don't think Winnipeg will want Alex DeBrincat in return, but again, there's a lot of different avenues. There's a lot of goaltenders that are either UFA or the team doesn't want anymore because they don't think that guy can win. If you got the right team around him, maybe you can. But that's on you to build the right team, Pierre Dorion. And I think he's going to be aggressive. And I think he's going to do a lot this year because he knows if it doesn't go well in 2023, 2024, he's not going to be in Ottawa. And it would have been a long tenure there where he didn't make the playoffs. So I'm not sure how appealing he would be to other teams around the league knowing that he had very little success in Ottawa after 2017. So I expect him to be ultra aggressive in trying to make moves. He got Jay Chychrun. I like the trade. I like Jay Chychrun as a player, but you need a goaltender. You need a goaltender that is consistent day in, day out. Not just, okay, this guy, we think he can give us a few games here and there. It can't be patchwork Anton Forsberg every other night. He's a backup goalie at at best. That's what he's a 2. So you look around. Tristan Jarry, would he interest you? Jonas Korpisalo, he would interest me. There's not a whole lot of, again, but Jarry, Korpisalo, Connor Hellebuck, Ilya Samsonov. Freddie Anderson. Freddie Anderson's a free agent this summer. Philip Gustafson is an RFA, who you had, oddly enough, you had in your pipeline. Jeremy Swayman's an RFA. Give him an offer sheet. Send Jeremy Swayman an offer sheet. Boston's not going to be able to match. They don't have cap space. They have $6 million in cap space and only 14 players signed. So they can't keep both Swayman and Ullmark. Well, Swayman's gone. He's hasta la vista. Varlamov's a UFA. Korpisalo, I just mentioned, I like a lot. Samsonov, an RFA in Toronto. Mackenzie Blackwood. Aiden Hill. So there are options out there that are better than Cam Talbot, who you had last year. Get one of them. If I'm looking at that list, let's go from the top. Let's go through this, guys. First name, Tristan Jarry. He scares me the most, and I think he's going to cost you the most money. He just had $3.5 million on his current cap. I think he's going to want more money. He's not worth it. He's not. He had a poor season last year. He's inconsistent. He's injury prone. I don't want him. He's probably going to want a long-term deal too. No. Next. Frederik Andersen. He played in the playoffs this year. I give him that, and he played well, quite frankly. But he only played 34 games in the regular season. So if he's only going to give you 34 games, you need a really good backup goalie, and Anton Forsberg isn't it. So no, not him. Gustafson, I don't think you're going to get him back. You can't. He's an RFA. I would choose him over just about anybody. I think he's a star. I think he's one of the next great goaltenders in the league. But maybe you can press Minnesota, because Minnesota was stupid and gave everybody's favorite goaltender, Marc-Andre Fleury, a 2-year deal. No other reason than the fact that he's Marc-Andre Fleury, nothing to do with his play. Sounds harsh? It's not. Go look up statistics. Go look at what he's done the last couple of years. Nothing. So I would put Gus, but I don't see that happening. Swayman made $925 last year as one of the best backup goaltenders in the league, and Swayman and Ullmark had the best save percentage, goals against average for a pair of anybody in the NHL. He's never been given the opportunity to be a number one goaltender, but he's 24. In 88 NHL games, he has a .920 save percentage and 9 shutouts. I think he could make $4 million a year, and I'm not sure Boston could match that offer with their situation. Boston might lose top 2 center. Bertuzzi's going to be gone. This roster is going to be different. And it's difficult to keep everybody. And they have Ullmark at $5 million. They're not going to give a goalie Swayman $9 and have $9 million with their 2 goaltenders. They're just not. They won't win with that model. So Swayman is an interesting option. Ronta, he's a backup goalie. If I was Ottawa, if I could get Ronta at $2 million and Swayman at $4 million, that would interest me. $6 million in net, and you have 2 guys that can play games. Varlamov, less interest. Korpisalo, I would like a lot, but I think he made $1.3 million on his last contract. I think he's going to want a lot more than that. Samsonov, again, I think he's going back to the Leafs. Blackwood, no. Aiden Hill. If I'm looking at that list, I want Phil Gustafson or I want Jeremy Swayman from the Ottawa Senators. And I would target Jeremy Swayman. And honestly, you think, we got to make a trade to get Jeremy Swayman. He's an RFA. Make an offer sheet. Make him an offer sheet, and Boston If they do match, they're fucked. If they don't, you get a good goaltender. That's how I'd approach this. If I'm Ottawa, who gives this thought, oh, you can't give an offer sheet because it's burning another team? It's a team in your division. Who cares? You've been searching for a goalie to lead your franchise for the last 7 years. Go fucking find one. Swayman's 24. He could be in your organization for the next decade. He's never been given the opportunity to be a true number one. That doesn't mean he can't be. Philip Gustafsson was never given that opportunity. He goes to Minnesota. He outplays Marc-Andre Fleury. He plays like a rock star this year. It was awesome. Korpisalo was dumped by Columbus, found his game again in Los Angeles. I think he's rebuilt his value. Sometimes it's just about the right opportunity and getting said opportunity. Adin Hill, in Arizona, kind of mulling around, gets an opportunity in the playoffs, then 2 months later, he's a Stanley Cup champion. Sometimes it's just that quick. It's, Vasilevsky, he was a prodigy. He was a first-round goaltender. Everybody knew he was going to be good. UC Saros, another guy, hasn't won yet, but again, he's been at the top of the sport for a long time. He's a small goaltender. Oh, you can't draft him. He'll never be good because he's not 6'5". Now he tells everybody to shut the hell up because he's one of the most consistent goalies in the league. Also, if I'm Ottawa, I call Nashville. You want to trade us UC Saros? Would that interest you? You want to tank a little bit. Your team's old. Your team isn't all that good. Barry Trotz, new GM. How about trading us UC Saros? You got Yaroslav Askarov, another first-round pick goaltender who's coming through your system. He makes $925. He made the conference finals of the Calder Cup playoffs with Milwaukee this year. He's likely going to be NHL ready next season. What if he gets an extended look to be their starting goaltender? Saros would have to leave to get that opportunity. Make some calls, Pierre, which I think he will, because he knows that he's running into a difficult situation right now. Peter Laviolette is the new head coach of the New York Rangers. He's coached in Long Island. He's coached in Philly. He's coached in Carolina. He's coached in Washington. And now he's coaching the New York Rangers. He's been all over the Metropolitan Division, that's for sure. He gets 3 years, a little under $5 million, but a good contract for Peter Laviolette. And he decides to leave Washington and gets a better situation in New York, quite frankly. Chris Drury hires a coach that he thinks can get it done, another veteran. And the Rangers are an interesting team to watch this offseason because I think they want to get bigger, and I think they're going to be aggressive in trading away some players that they just don't think can help them win. But I like Peter Laviolette. He's a Stanley Cup champion. That was a long time ago, however. 2006, if you recall. The Rangers are always an attractive job, certainly, because you look at the team and you say, wow, this team has some pedigree. Their original six, they have everything you'd want. But I wouldn't want to coach Artemi Panarin. I've said that forever. Prima donna times 100. He's a pain in the ass. He's just not a winning player. That's another thing with him. But I would take the job for that money, certainly. At his age, probably his last time coaching in the NHL, and see if he can win another Stanley Cup. Paul Maurice, give it a try in Florida. He got to a cup final. Bruce Cassidy got the Vegas job. He wins a Stanley Cup after departing Boston. So it can happen for these veteran coaches. Quickly, I'm going to get to the U.S. Open. It's going to be a quicker show today. We'll get back to the longer format tomorrow. UFC. I tee up UFC tomorrow. I'm going to talk about some NBA rumors and anything out of the U.S. Open, of course. Anything else that comes up on the old timeline. So I go into FanDuel here. U.S. Open has officially started at LA Country Club. And let's go to this little thing called the US Open. So, you can get Brooks Koepka at plus 1,000 right now, which, again, not a great payout. John Rahm, Scotty Scheffler at plus 950. Jordan Spieth plus 2,000. Patrick Cantlay plus 1,800. Bryson DeChambeau. Here's some that I like, that I wouldn't mind taking a little spin at. Colin Morikawa plus 6,500. He's had an up and down year. He's had some injuries, but I like Colin Morikawa a lot. I know he has teed off. I think he might be over par, but if he is, I'll tell you not to take him. He's plus 2 over 3. Okay, maybe not. Maybe don't take him. Never mind. Scratch that from the record. But looking at good buys. Nick Taylor's plus 16,000. I don't see him winning back-to-back weeks. It's very hard to do. Shane Lowry plus 10,000. Not a bad bet. He's a really good player at the majors. He's always consistent. Joaquin Niemann plus 9,500. Super talented kid. One of the best golfers in the world. Just haven't seen him because he's on the LIV Tour. And let's see. Patrick Cantlay plus 1,800. Not a bad bet as well. He's due to win a major. He's too talented not to. Even though his get up is beyond horrible. Max Homa plus 2,900. Also not a bad look. I like Max Homa. Matt Fitzpatrick, last year's former champion, is at plus 3,700. But as we currently go here, Omar Morales, who is an amateur, is leading the event at -3. The bigger names, Ricky Fowler's -1, Corey Connors, Max Homa, John Rahm, Schauffele, Sergio, even par, DeChambeau is even par of the day. But there's also Victor Hovland +1, Scotty Scheffler +1, Justin Thomas is +2. He's had a bad year. Colin Morikawa is +2, Patrick Reed +3 over 3. Woof. So still a lot of tee times today. It's in Los Angeles, so that means it's night golf. We're going to see it done throughout the day. Probably golf until about 11 p.m., 12 p.m. tonight, which is fantastic. So again, shorter show today, but tomorrow I'm going to touch on the UFC weekend and actually an interesting weekend in MMA. So I'm going to get into other MMA things going into the weekend. Some fights in the Bellator, some fights in PFL, which interests me. So that's coming up tomorrow. We'll chat about the US Open. We'll get into some basketball headlines involving Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard, a few other players around the association. If any NHL news pops up, there's some NFL stuff with Dalvin Cook, Stephon Diggs, and a few other interesting tidbits. So that will be discussed tomorrow, Friday, on the program. But thank you for tuning in today. Congratulations to the Vegas Golden Knights on winning the Stanley Cup. Talk to you tomorrow. This is To The Point.